You ever wonder if you have any trauma? Well, you might, and you might not even know it. Because sometimes the trauma was in your history and your brain just suppresses it so you don't remember it, but emotional patterns come out and it's called getting triggered. This is Dr. Spencer Coaches. Today, I'm going to talk to you about you may have trauma in your history and not know it. Because if you find yourself getting triggered a lot, meaning upset easily by what people say or how people talk, or people remind you of something that you're not really aware of, but you get upset over it, this could mean you have trauma. So what are the signs of trauma? And this way, because if you become aware of it, you can heal it. Because if you're not aware of it, you're not going to heal it. And it creates neurotic behavioral patterns that can cause disruption in your life. And this is what happened to me. Because in my life, I was abused when I was 4 and 5. And a lot of my behavioral patterns were acting out the emotional disturbances that I felt. And I didn't know I had trauma. I just was walking around like I had a chip on my shoulder, overreacting to people, getting really upset, really angry all the time. And I didn't know why. People didn't know why. I didn't know why. It wasn't until years later where I processed some memories where I had trauma and I realized, well, that was the root of all of my emotional disturbances, my despair, my depression, my anxiety, my sense of hopelessness, all came from that time period. And it wasn't until I actually recalled those moments where I was able to process those emotions. And by processing those emotions, I cleared them out of me. And I feel much more appreciation for life as a result of that. So let me dive right in. So if you find yourself avoiding people, isolating yourself, shunning the company of others, that's a sign of trauma. Because when you have these emotional disturbances, these bad feelings, people can remind you of that, especially in social circumstances. It could be so overwhelming for the brain to process stimulation. People like crowds and things of that nature, even family events, even like classrooms, you could be avoiding people. Now, I'm not talking about being introverted. I'm talking about, really going out of your way to avoid people. Because people remind you of something, remind you of that bad experience, which is trauma. Whether it's you were abused sexually, verbally, physically, it's traumatizing. And the brain suppresses it to protect yourself. You don't want to remember and feel these things all the time. So it's the way the brain just stuffs it away in the subconscious mind to deal with it at a later point in time. You isolate yourself. Avoiding people and isolating yourself come hand in hand. But when you're continually avoiding people and you isolate yourself, it's like, I'm not talking about, spending time alone to do some soul searching or recentering yourself. I'm talking about completely shutting yourself off from the world, closing your door and hanging out in your bedroom for weeks on end, not picking up the phone, not answering the door, not getting your mail. When you really isolate yourself, you're hiding from something because you're protecting yourself from that bad experience. Getting triggered. If you get upset easily by what a person says, by how a person looks, by what a person smells like, smell is often the most provocative, evocative sense of memory. And often in just the way a person sounds can remind you of a bad person in your life and you get triggered, or the way a person talks to you. It can trigger you and you start getting irritated and then filled with rage, or irritated and all of a sudden sobbing incredibly uncontrollably. It's usually the rage that comes out. And if there is an extreme rage over, let's just say, hey, I really love you. I love spending time with you. And all of a sudden they react like, oh, why are you saying that? That's a sign of trauma. It's not an appropriate response to respond to somebody who tells you they love you and loves spending time with you, and then blow up on them, freak out on them, and say mean things to them. This happens with people with trauma. I would do that. That's how I know. I was an emotional wreck most of my life. And believe it or not, I don't come across like that because I process the emotions. You process the emotions to clear them. You don't repress them to clear them. Depression. You find yourself just feeling down about everything. With depression comes isolation. With depression comes avoiding people. There is often a lethargy, a poor outlook on life, not believing in yourself, and feelings of low self-worth, just feeling down about yourself and your life and giving up hope. There's a real negative outlook, and it isn't pessimism, because pessimism is actually, there's a high degree of intelligence behind pessimism. It's really just a sense of hopelessness, and you feel a heaviness in your body and a darkness. Your thoughts become very thick. You can't think clearly. There's often a replaying of a bad event in your life, and you keep replaying it in your mind where you think lowly of yourself, like, I'm a piece of shit, or I'm not worth it, or I'm a terrible person. You think these things to yourself over and over and over. Nothing's going to work out for me. I'm such a terrible person. I'm horrible at that. And all of a sudden, you just shut down. You become almost like a deer in headlights, if you will. You just become like a zombie. There's very little emotional response, very little expression. That's often signs of depression. You stop doing things, stop going out, and you feel a sense of just not wanting to do anything. All your motivation and hope just vanishes. Those are signs of depression that often have their cause in trauma. A lot of people get depressed and they don't know why. Why am I depressed? Now, I'm not talking about momentary, hours of the day or even a couple days of just feeling tired. I mean, you may have a busy week and might want to sleep all day and shut the world out, not pick up your phone, pull the shades down, and go to bed for 2 days. And that's not depression. That's temporary depression, but it's not really clinical depression. Major depressive disorder, if you will, when it lasts from weeks to months to years on end. Everybody gets tired. Everybody has bad days, and you could just sulk for a day and then you get over it and you move on. You get back to your regular mood. When you're depressed, it lasts a lot longer. You never get out of that bad mood. No matter what happens, you can't be cheered up. Those are signs of depression. Even thoughts of suicide, suddenly quitting your job. You start drinking, do things like that. Your room becomes a mess. You don't take care of yourself because you don't care about yourself. Signs of depression. Often that's a major telltale sign that there's trauma in your life. Hypervigilance. Always being on guard. Always looking over your shoulder. Always being suspicious of everybody. Never trusting anybody. Assuming the worst about everybody. About every circumstance. And it's like this, you're on guard, your nerves get frayed because it's like being stressed out all the time. You have this hyper focus looking for the weaknesses of others to keep yourself protected. Hypervigilance. It's always being this low-level fear all of the time. You can't be happy. You can't feel satisfied. You can't feel fulfilled. There's no joy in paranoia. Extreme mood swings. 1 minute you're happy, the next minute you're crying, the next minute you're extremely angry, breaking things. When you have these extreme mood swings, that's a sign of emotional dysregulation. When there's trauma, there is emotional dysregulation. You can't control yourself, and your emotions go all over the place to the extremes. Because it's basically when you get triggered, you experience those traumatic feelings of anger, rage, fear, guilt, and shame. And underneath that, there's despair, helplessness, hopelessness, and agony. And it's not pleasant to feel these feelings. It's, who the heck wants to feel agony all the time? And so your brain, all of a sudden, it was controlling it by suppressing it. And then it's like the bottle got loose. The lid blew off, and all of a sudden, all of these emotions come to the surface all at once. And when that happens, You go in these mood swings and you just find yourself, people wonder what's going on. Like, what's wrong with that person? Denial. Often when you're constantly denying how you're being and what you're really feeling, that's a sign of trauma. You may even get offended because people may call you out, like constructive criticism, and all of a sudden you get really upset, really bothered by that because it's true and you can't deny it anymore. But when you're in denial, you're completely unaware of yourself because your mind is suppressing the memories, the bad feelings. So you just deny it. Being in denial of who you are, being in denial of bad behavior, being in denial of bad habits, being in denial, there's a real lack of accountability there, but there's a denial that you're not even aware of it. You have a huge blind spot in your character and you just deny it. It's very hard to talk to a person who is in denial because they'll deny it. And you can't make them aware of their issues because they'll just deny it and they'll get offended by it. They'll make you be the bad person for making them aware of their issues because they're not ready to face it. So they're in denial. A messy room or car. This is often a sign of trauma. It's usually a sign of depression, which is a sign of trauma. You lack organization. You can't prioritize because you can't think straight. So you stop caring. When you stop caring, it's because there's trauma. And there's these bad feelings you don't want to deal with. Instead of dealing with them, you become indifferent. And by becoming indifferent, you don't take care of your room, you don't take care of your car, you don't take care of your home, you don't take care of your yard. Everything goes to crap. And you find yourself just in the middle of a mess. It's a sign of trauma. Because you haven't dealt with the emotions, your mind, you can't think clearly. Instead of dealing with it, you're in denial, and then you just shut down and become indifferent and stop caring. Now, overeating. A lot of people, hey, who doesn't like to eat? But overeating to stuff the feelings down. Often loneliness. This comes with loneliness. And you're lonely because of your mood swings, and you're in denial of it, so no one ever wants to talk to you because you're easily triggered. And now you find yourself all alone, and you don't want to feel this depression or this loneliness, and so you eat a lot. Because eating instantly brings up serotonin. It's a feel-good hormone. And it's just a way of uplifting yourself instead of dealing with the real underlying root cause, which are your belief patterns and the emotional memories that come with them. So all of these signs are signs of trauma. And when you have trauma, sometimes it's so devastating, you're just not ready to deal with it. And that's okay. You'll get to that point. Well, you'll get sick and tired of your own life where you're going to have to admit that something's wrong with me. I don't know what it is. I need to go talk to somebody. Now, most people talk to a mental health care specialist. And that's what you should do. Because they're going to be the ones that really know how to deal with your situation, to help you process these emotions, to give you a safe space to talk about it. I mean, the primary reason why I didn't talk about things was because I was in a very judgmental space until I tried to commit suicide when I was 19, and that opened the door to therapy. And I went into a therapist's office, and she radiated unconditional love. She's just a very caring person. And it was the first time I felt safe enough to really open up to somebody. And often that's all that is needed, a safe space for someone or for you to open up to somebody. It doesn't have to be a therapist. It could be a confidant. It could be a really good friend. It could be your mom or dad. It could be anybody. But someone you trust. You got to talk to somebody and share your feelings. You may not know why you feel this way, but at least getting the feelings out is some form of relief. It's like letting the pressure off so it doesn't build up till you explode. Be honest with how you feel. If you're not honest with how you feel, you're in denial. And when you live an inauthentic life, you're never going to be fulfilled. When you find your true self, when you find a sense of authenticity, you have to dig for it. And often these traumatic feelings are in the process, you got to dig through them to get to who you really are, your core values, your true self, your sense of authenticity. You can't lie to yourself. You can't keep suppressing these emotions because sooner or later they're going to come to the surface. And they already are presenting themselves as these neurotic behavioral patterns that other people see and you don't. And before they wreak havoc, it's better to process them so you can get clear, become lighter, become filled with joy, and move on with your life. This is Dr. Spencer Coaches. If you have any questions, I can help you with this. I'm a trauma-informed life coach. I'm also a business coach, and I find that people in the professional world, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're an employee, always have when they have trouble in their life, it's always tied to trauma. It keeps you from succeeding in your world. And if you don't process these feelings, you're not going to get ahead in your life. And that creates problems. You don't want that. So go ahead and leave a comment below. My contact information will be on my website, which the link will be in the description. This is Dr. Spencer Coaches. I sure hope that helps. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.